Everything you picture about the invention of music is wrong. You're picturing a caveman, a hollow log, a rock hitting a rock, something crude, a first clumsy attempt. Now look at the actual object. A wing bone from a griffin vulture, 21 centimeters long, 8 millimeters across, narrower than your little finger, 5 finger holes, carefully spaced, and at one end, 2 precise V-shaped notches, cut so a mouth can seal against them. That is not a first attempt. That is a design. It was made at least 40,000 years ago. Its neighbors in a cave 8 kilometers away have been dated to 43. Put that in order. Farming is about 12,000 years old. Writing, about 5,000. The wheel is younger than writing. Music beat all of them by 30,000 years. So who invented it? And why would a freezing, hungry human, burning calories they could not afford to lose, spend hours drilling holes into a bone? The answer isn't what you'd guess, and the flute isn't even the strangest part. Here's the difficulty. Sound leaves nothing behind. A stone axe survives. A hearth survives. A skull survives. A song lasts 4 seconds, then it's gone into the air, and no amount of digging brings it back. So archaeologists work sideways. They can't find music. They can only find the object's music left fingerprints on, then argue, sometimes for decades, about whether those fingerprints are real. Which means the story of the first song isn't a story about instruments, it's a story about how careful you have to be and how easily a beautiful idea turns out to be wrong. Because one of the most famous first instruments on Earth probably isn't one. Begin underground, in southern Germany. September 2008. A cave called Hohle Fels. A team led by Nicholas Conrad of the University of Tübingen lifts 12 fragments of bone out of an Ice Age layer, scattered across a patch of ground the size of a laptop. Reassembled, those fragments become the flute. Conrad's team published it in Nature the following year and called it, without hedging, the oldest musical instrument in the world. The original is far too fragile to play, so they built a replica from the same species of bone. Somebody put it to their lips and played a recognizable modern tune on it. An Ice Age vulture bone, still in tune. 8 kilometers away sits a second cave, Geissenklösterle. In 2012, a team led by Tom Hyam at Oxford ran high-precision radiocarbon dating there, pushing the site back to between 42 and 43,000 years old. Geissenklösterle produced flutes of swan bone. Bird bone is a gift, it's already a tube, you only have to cut the holes. But the cave produced something else. A flute made of mammoth-ivory. Ivory is solid. To make it into a flute, you must carve out a rod, split it down its full length, hollow both halves by hand, cut the finger holes, then rejoin the halves, with a seal airtight enough to hold a note. It came out of the ground in 31 pieces, reassembled 18 centimeters, 3 finger holes. Somebody, in an ice age, spent that much of their life on a sound. And that is exactly what should bother you. Nobody's first instrument is a mammoth-ivory flute. An object like that sits at the end of a long tradition, not the start of one. The beginning is somewhere behind it, in the dark, where nothing survived. Look at what we actually have. 22 Paleolithic flutes from the French Pyrenees, fewer than a dozen from the German caves, across a century of digging. That is close to the entire physical archive of Ice Age music. Everything else rotted. A drum is skin stretched over wood, gone in a generation. A reed pipe, gone. A rattle of dried seeds, gone. And the oldest instrument leaves nothing at all. Because it's you. Hands, feet, chest, throat. You can clap, stamp, and sing with no equipment, no workshop, and no trace. Which brings us to the bone that cracked this story open. Then cracked it apart. 1995, Slovenia. A cave called Divje Babe. The archaeologist Ivan Turk pulls the thigh bone of a young cave bear from a Neanderthal layer. 11 centimeters long, 2 clean round holes in a straight line. The layer dates to between 50 and 60,000 years ago. If that bone is a flute, it is a Neanderthal flute, built by another human species, long before our people reached Europe. It sits in the National Museum of Slovenia. Labeled exactly that. And here is where this channel has to be honest with you. Most archaeologists now think it's a chewed bone. Francesco Dorico compared it with cave bear bones from sites where no human had ever set foot, and found the same round holes in the same anatomical place. In 2015, Cage's Diedrich examined 15 cave bear dens and concluded the punctures match the bite of an Ice Age hyena. April Noel puts it plainly, most paleoanthropologists accept it as a chewed bone. Turk and the museum still disagree, but the honest position is that the oldest instrument on Earth may be somebody's dinner. So if the objects are this thin and this contested, where else do you look? You stop looking at bones, you start looking at brains. In 1997, Steven Pinker made a deliberately provocative claim. Music, he said, is auditory cheesecake. Delicious and useless. A byproduct of systems that evolved to do other jobs. 8 years later, the archaeologist Stephen Mithen answered at book length. In The Singing Neanderthals, he argues the reverse, that before our ancestors had language, they had whole sounds carrying whole meanings, song, in other words, before speech. Mithen's idea is a hypothesis, argued, not proven, and plenty of researchers reject it. But then there's the evidence from the youngest humans alive. In 2009, Istvan Winkler and Henk-Jan Honing wired 14 newborn babies to an EEG, newborns. Days into being alive, years from a single word. They were played a simple drum rhythm. Then the researchers quietly removed the downbeat, the strong beat, the one your foot lands on. Every time it went missing, the baby's brains fired the signal for a violated expectation. They weren't listening to a rhythm, they were predicting one. Nobody taught them. It came installed. And then, in 2023, 7 small bones from northern Israel turned the question inside out. A team led by Laurent Davin published them in scientific reports. At a site called Nen Malaha, they had 7 objects, wing bones of water birds, punched with tiny finger holes. 12,000 years old, made by the Natufians, the last hunter-gatherers of the Levant. The complete one is 63 millimeters long, 4 millimeters across, about the size of your thumb. The finger holes sit 2 to 3 millimeters apart, so regular the researchers suspect a template. Davin's team built working replicas and played them. They do not sound like flutes. They sound like birds of prey, specifically the call of a common kestrel and the call of a sparrowhawk. 12,000 years ago, somebody carved a whistle the size of a thumb that could imitate a falcon. To lure prey, perhaps? Or to speak to something in the sky? Now pull back from the bones entirely and look at the species. In 2019, Samuel Mayer and a team at Harvard built an ethnographic record of 315 human societies and asked one blunt question: is there anybody without music? Music showed up in 309 of them. They chased the missing 6 through other sources. Every one of those had music too. 315 out of 315. Music isn't a culture, it's a species. And then comes the finding that should genuinely unsettle you. Robin Dunbar's team at Oxford measured what music does to the body, using pain threshold as a proxy for endorphin release. Singing raised it, drumming raised it, dancing raised it, listening did nothing at all. The chemistry only fires when you make the sound, not when you receive it. That is what modern science keeps circling back to, one controlled experiment at a time. Oxford silent disco studies, where dancers moving in synchrony feel closer and hurt less, and dancers who don't. Music therapists rebuilding speech in stroke patients. Choirs prescribed for loneliness. We are, very slowly, and with an enormous amount of equipment, catching up to something a person in a freezing cave already knew. The flute maker was not building entertainment. They were building a machine for holding people together. One that runs on breath. One that only works if you use it. 43,000 years later, the bone survived. The song didn't. Nobody will ever recover the melody, or who was in the room, or what they were mourning in the dark. But somebody sat down in an ice age, in a world where an hour of daylight was a calorie you might not get back, and spent those hours drilling 5 holes into a vulture's wing. What were they trying to say? If this is the kind of thing you want more of, subscribe. There's a lot more still buried down here.